Okay, so triggers. There was a question on YouTube and on Discord for this. So I have a player. I'm going to mark him as player. And I gave him well, he's got a capsule collider automatically, but I gave him a rigid body. You need to have a rigid body on something to have a collision of some type or trigger, right? So here I have a box, right? And he's marked as trigger. Okay, so if I now come into here and do trigger event, and I say on trigger enter, player, let's set an event called hit. And if I want, I can store whatever triggered this this trigger, right? Which is a great way to get references, right? So if I come into here, see that the box is triggered, it was the capsule that triggered it, and we're over here. Now, with that said, let's come over here. You also have on trigger exit, and I can just pretty much reuse that. So on trigger exit, similar but obviously much different though, is on trigger enter, you've entered, but now if I exit the trigger, we get that event. See how that works? Right? You could also use on trigger stay, and on stay works like on trigger enter, but it fires a lot more. It's based on if they are in it, right? Like if I go to this cube now and I tell him to reset his FSM, he triggers right away because it's checking. It's not looking for this capsule has entered. He's looking for if he's just inside of it, right? So that's the kind of the difference between trigger stay and trigger enter. Like if I swap it over to trigger enter and I now run that logic, he doesn't run because the capsule hasn't entered the trigger. He's already in the trigger. Okay. Of course, now I probably broke the logic. That's okay. So that's one method. Now on here, you also could, oh, let's do it this way. You could also use the transitions from system events for on trigger enter. Those also work. Right? Now if I go to the cube, I can come into here and it's the same idea. Right? There's nothing here that actually fired. It was this guy. He came in through this. Now he didn't store the object going that way though. So if you want to get the information, get trigger info, right? Because now, okay, what did we hit? We hit this object, right? And if I'll even get rid of that, so it's just not even there. And you can see how this guy now works. See, he hit the trigger, and it was the capsule we hit. So getting trigger info and using that. Okay, so that's triggers. Now we could use, alternatively, maybe we don't want a trigger. Instead, we want a collision event. So a collision event is when two objects physically hit. Triggers are based on a trigger, like a trigger volume, right? Collisions are actually on a something hitting the other object, right? So, but same idea, we can store the object. And he needs for that, he probably needs a rigid body. We'll just make him as kinetic. Oh, does my capsule have an issue now? Oh, okay, yeah. So this is one of those other things. So, be a good way to show this. All right, so let's take him off Kinetic and use gravity, just for a moment here, and I'll show you why. I'm going to raise him above, and he's going to drop onto the player. See, now it triggers. Okay, so there's a big difference with that. Having this. So if I Kinetic, it doesn't work. It's not firing that event. Okay. Often one of the things I do early in my projects is I go to my project settings and I go to my physics, and here you have contact pairs node. I have right now, because this is a different project, default contact pairs. Well, you can turn on different types, so I'm going to enable all of them. Now I should have, this guy will now hit. Okay, so now we have a physical contact with Kinetic. Now alternatively, you can do this same thing as we did with the triggers by using system events with a collision enter. Right, where it comes in through this thing. Now, as that one, just the same as it was with the triggers one, we could also use the get collision info, right? And you can store a bunch of data. Right, so we go to our cube, and I can watch it as I now hit, and we get, okay, we've collided with the capsule. So there's a big difference between triggers, trigger entering, and collisions. Like I said, triggers are based on a volume, so these things don't interact per se with physical objects. Collisions are physical hits. Okay, so that's your two main ways, but and the question on the Discord was actually something a little bit different. The question on the Discord was based on particle systems. So here we have a particle system, and I'm just going to change its shape a little bit, something like that, and then I am going to put it so it's right lined up with the player almost, like this. Okay, so now we have particles flying at the player and going through the player. Now the player, there's a few things you need to do, right, for this to work. Is on the player, and they might have to get, we'll see, particle collision event. Okay. Now that's not going to work for us, or shouldn't, because the particles are just flying through. But if I go to the particle system and I say collisions, and I come over here and say send collision messages, now we should have, I guess, nothing yet. And that is, let's see, it should send to both. And there we can visualize our actual colliders that they puts on them. Send collision messages, and it's not going. Let's set this guy back to gravity for this one. Now, because I don't want him to actually move, I'm going to turn that on. No, we're still not getting nothing. Alright, let's check in here. Guess it would help if I spelt it right. Get particle collision info. No. I just dealt with this not too long ago either. All right, let's just see if we can get the triggers working first. So I'm going to take collisions off. I'm going to put triggers on. Right, and again, you can visualize bounds and collider component. Let's see what that does. You can have one. All right, so oh, let's do callback. That might need a trigger enter actually. Let's check. Let's just see if he needs one of these. No, he does not need one of those. So we have no particle yet. Untagged. Alright, 1 second here. I'm trying to think. What did I do for this? I literally just dealt with this too in one of my projects that I'm working on. So I was using ParticleCollisions. Actually, I think I did it in my what do you call it? My game jam. Planes. I don't know what the hell that's about. So, okay, we want to send messages. Visualize bounds. Let's see. Let's see what that does. I didn't have to use that before. Oh, there we go. I had to put the world space. Okay, now we have collisions. See, they're bouncing off the player. So, type world, not planes. Type world. 3D, 2D. We want 3D. You can drop the bounce off, right, and they kind of hit it and stop moving. Lifetime loss. What else can we do? Really collides with everything. You can control the layers, collision quality. Okay, so there's particles colliding. Okay. Now let's turn that off and let's go back to the triggers. Trigger component, collider component. I would assume it would be this guy. No, it's not him. Outside, enter, exit. And I doubt it needs this guy, because that wouldn't make a whole lot of sense to me. But maybe it is. You know, maybe. Visualize bounds. And on the player, he's not getting the trigger enter. I'll have to play with that one. I haven't played too much with the triggers on those things, other than, yeah, I have done them quite some time ago. So let's just turn those off. I'll play with those later. So collisions, we have a particle system, type world, and we need to make sure this guy's on, the send events, or send collision messages. And then you can play with a few of these different things. It's right. If I crank that up and drop that, it's almost like it sticks to them. right? I don't know if that's the required thing. You get a bit of a ricochet event happening there. You can give it force, which should pop up, yeah, like that, because he's locked in his position, so he can rotate, but he can't. Oh, you can do all sorts of, I guess, little things. Give it some noise factor. But anyways, that's some collisions, some methods of getting some references, right? Also, the other thing is, if you have, since we're covering references, let's make sure this thing's lined up. Actually, let's put him over here. Let's just make sure he's lined up that way, right? If you want references, like if you're doing anything and you need to know where the player is or who the player is or what the player is, right? Get owner on the player, right? And I can store him as a global. And the globals are, well, they're a global variable. Everyone has access. They're kind of like a static variable. So this guy here can now get distance, if you wanted to the global player. And let's store our distance, right? So we see the player's capsule because we're pulling it from the globals, and our distance is 4.35, right? So you can play with various things with that. Just having the player as a global. The other thing you could do is a RayCast. So a RayCast, it's kind of like a laser, but I hate using the word laser because it doesn't travel. It's not like it has to shoot and it's going at a certain speed. In the frame, it does go from point A to point B in that order, but at the same time it's instantly. But you could also do this same idea, and you could filter these things out by layers and stuff like that. But that's what this yellow little line represents. That's the RayCast actually happening, right? So he's RayCasting forward, and he's hitting. As you can see, he's hitting the capsule, right? And if I move it over, oh, he doesn't clear, but it's no longer hitting the capsule. Like here, let's take this guy and say none. All right, so now he's not hitting anything. And I move him over, now he's hitting the capsule again, right? So rays are just a way to get, because I mean really distance doesn't matter to them. They're just kind of like a point A to point B, line of sight kind of almost thing. They're extremely useful for getting references. One of the things that took me a long time to figure out, and I don't know if they're here, is another thing called SphereCasts, or alternatively BoxCasts. And they are a absolutely beautiful. You have overlap sphere, which is also another really good one to get. Check sphere, but we want SphereCast. And SphereCast is just like a RayCast. It's literally identical on how they function. The only difference is a RayCast is one point to another point, and it's the thickness of one unit, like 1 micro unit or whatever. So a SphereCast is the same thing, right? I can do the direction, self, my distance. You know, I can store the hit or stored at hit. Oh, it doesn't have the way they have the action set up, they don't have the event, or they don't have the store hit object. So let's just go hit and no hit. There's probably a SphereCast too, I bet you, if I was a betting man. And you could debug, but the debug actually looks a lot like the normal SphereCast. But you can now get Ray hit info. That should work for these, or I can store the hit object. Right, copy that. I guess we don't need it down here. So let's just finish and take this and finish. And we don't want an infinite loop, so let's make sure we're not doing this a million times in one frame by just adding a next frame event. And that can finish it. I'm going to take that and copy it and bring it over here. And in here, set game object. I want to make sure that the hit object is going to be empty. So I'm just going to make a new variable called null, and I'm not going to fill it with anything. It's just going to be an empty variable. But I'm going to make sure that that equals null, I guess you could say. Right? So here we have, it is hitting, and it's hitting the capsule. Right? But the SphereCast, like I said, and this line is showing a line. But in reality, that SphereCast is literally using a radius of, well, I should probably, let's use this one. No, let's use this one. Is using that radius, right? So in reality, that's SphereCast. If you look out on the side, that's how thick that ray is. It's that thick. And that's what a SphereCast is compared to a RayCast, right? Now, if I take this thing, you would think if I move it so that laser's not hitting, it's still hitting because it's 1 unit in radius, right? I actually got to come way over here for it to not hit anymore, right? And that's a SphereCast, right? And if I bring this radius down, as you can see it now, it's not hitting. I got to get much closer to hit, right? So SphereCasts are really, really, really cool things that have become very useful. One of my favorite uses on them in the ways of those versus RayCasts, well, ground checking is a good one, but this would be a good example. Is let's put a FSM and here and do a RayCast, and I'll show you the difference here. We're going to put it on the camera, okay, and we're going to store hit object, and we can actually, you know what, I'm going to do RayCast 2 if I have it. No, I don't have it. Okay, whatever. We'll use RayCast 1 then. And then I'm just going to do a next frame event. And we'll go like this. So we'll stick him there. Make sure to put things in order. Everything runs top to bottom. Okay? That's very important. So this guy here, he's just going to be... What should we do? Let's do a game object compare. Compare. Actually, you know, the other thing we could do instead of that, we could just go is null. Game object is null. So if our hit object, because we're raycasting and we're coming over here regardless, is null, is not null. Right, so now we have is null, is not null, And then let's just bring him up. And go back. Copy that. Paste him here. It's not null. Let's go back. And then let's put a next frame in here just so we can make sure we see those lines a little better. All right, so now if I add another FSM to this camera and I just add just a basic, say, mouse look. I should probably bring this down and that one to be a negative. I'm not too worried about that stuff. Okay, so now if I hit play, what we should have is okay. So are we hitting? So it's null like all the time right now, and I need to line it up just perfect, which is actually very, very difficult to do. So let's create a UI image, put him right in the middle, and just scale him right down so I know where my ray is hitting. Alright, so where is our camera? It's right there. Right, so we should now be hitting that, even though we're not. Direction. Oh, I never gave it a direction. That's stupid of me. Because now it hit, but now it's not clearing. Okay, so let's just fix that up. Because I never is not null. Now let's set game object. So we do that same thing as I did before. We're going to set the hit object to a null variable. So we know it is hit. Let's kind of reset and do it again. Right? And this is where SphereCasts and RayCasts for me really are different, because I got to come over and I can hit it, right? And you can see like it's as it's flipping up and down that I'm hitting it and not hitting it. And if you're playing a game and it's a first-person shooter or something along those lines, and maybe you have an interact system where you want to click on something, or you got a mouse over something like that, this point is so small and so sensitive, it becomes a huge pain in the bum. Where a SphereCast in this situation, to me, is just so much better. Like, even if you just go relatively small, you know, it's oh, I have to get Ray info with the SphereCast, but that's no biggie. So the hit object. Okay, now, oh, I didn't mean to close it though. Right, so now we're not hitting it. We're hitting it. We're not hitting it. It's almost the same as that sphere as the RayCast, but because of that little bit of thickness, it gives me just that much more little room to play with, right? And you can increase that a bit. So when you're dealing with mouse overs and hovers and stuff like that, and you have an interaction system, it's just, to me, it feels a lot more forgiving. It's a lot nicer. I mean, this is a capsule. Like, he's pretty wide and thick. I mean, sometimes you're dealing with like a key or something, and the collider is just a stupid little stick. And sometimes lining up a RayCast is just frustrating. Where this SphereCast, which is just like a RayCast but thicker, just works just beautifully, right? So there's some ways to get some references. There's some triggers, collisions, even though I'll have to play with that effect one for the trigger one. I'll play with that one for a while. And then a little bit on RayCast too. So hopefully that helps.